Welcome to Cut to the Chase, where we talk about compelling legal, regulatory, and public interest information and news. Your host is Greg Goldfarb, an attorney, entrepreneur, investor, and activist.
All right, folks, it's time for our favorite podcast, Cut to the Chase. And by the time this episode is released, the 2024 Olympics will be over. I'm bringing on Julie Kliegman, who is an author and an editor. She was copy chief for Sports Illustrated, copy editor at Ringer, and wrote a book that was released in March called Mind Game, an inside look at the mental health playbook of elite athletes. How are you doing today, Julie?
I'm doing great. How are you?
I'm good. Fabulous. Thanks for asking. So, listen, obviously a lot of people are watching the Olympics. A lot of people know Simone Biles and know that she had some issues, and she's not the only one. So let's talk a bit about what motivated you to write the Mind Game.
Yeah. So at the beginning of the pandemic, I think it was a time when a lot of people were realizing that they were undergoing mental health challenges that maybe they hadn't faced before. And this was athletes and non-athletes. And I had already been writing about mental health in sports for several years by that point. And it just felt like things were coming to a head a little bit in terms of more people dealing with these challenges. So I was like writing stories about it. I'm like, I think there's a book here. And there was, so that worked out. And then of course, as I was writing the book, Naomi Osaka and Simone Biles both came forward with their challenges. And I think Simone's challenges especially kind of like shook everyone up a little bit and made them take notice.
So let's go through a little bit of the Simone story, what happened she was, everybody knew of her in 2016 at Tokyo that was Rio, right?
Yeah.
2021 was Tokyo. That's when she withdrew. But go through the Simone story. And, I'm always amazed when I see her doing all of her moves,
Yeah.
you could, be suffering because those are, some sports, it's like you hit the ball, you throw the ball, but, the double twist, somersaults or whatever sounds like something you don't want to be messing around with unless you're of sound.
Absolutely.
So let's talk about Simone and her story.
Yeah, so Simone, as you said, was competed in Rio. That was her first games. She was the all-around champion and quite impressive. She's already, very dominant at that point. And so she comes back in Tokyo after not being sure she would compete in those games at all, especially once they were postponed. She was like, do I have another year in me? She felt she was getting old by like gymnast age standards. And then she goes to compete in Tokyo. She makes it out there. She had disclosed to the media well beforehand, back when the games got postponed, that she was seeing a therapist. So mental health is already something that was on her mind before the Tokyo games. But obviously, when she sets foot in Tokyo, it kind of explodes for her. She ended up experiencing something that gymnasts call the twisties, which is when your mind can't really keep track of where your body is in space while you're doing these elaborate flips. And so she ended up withdrawing from a number of the competitions in Tokyo, the team all around, the individual all around, and she just comes back at the end of the games for gymnastics to take bronze on balance beam. And that was just such a huge moment because the twisties, are a form of mental health struggle for sure. And so for one of the greatest athletes of our time to be admitting that and taking care of herself and educating people on what that means was just huge.
So as part of writing the book, you interviewed a number of these athletes, Kevin Love, DeMar DeRozan, 2 basketball players, several other athletes. And, I would imagine that part of the whole mental health issue is not wanting to own up to it, not wanting others to know about your struggles. I mean, Michael Phelps, amazing athlete. And so what was it like going through the interview process? Were people, the athletes, hesitant? Were they like, hey, listen, I'll tell you my story, but I don't want you to reveal my name? How did that kind of play into the whole book writing and what you sort of learned and how that shaped the book that you wrote?
I think on the whole, athletes were more comfortable talking to me and more eager to talk to me than I expected. I expected to have a lot of keep me anonymous kinds of things, or, thanks but no thanks responses. And of course, I did get some of those. But on the whole, people were excited to talk about this. They were energized that there's more momentum behind this conversation now than there ever has been before.
Do you think that there was a common theme amongst these athletes? Was it something about being an athlete or being recognized in the public or the pressure to perform that, kind of shaped the discussion and what all these people were going through?
I don't know if there's one unifying thread. I think some people, their sport and their fame has contributed to their mental illness or mental health challenges, but for others, these conditions may have started when they were young, and not had much to do with sports at all. And for some, sports are healing for them. For some, sports are more of a stressor. So there's so many different kind of paths you can take and experiences you can have that it's so hard to like narrow it down to like, this is a common theme or this is what happens to athletes.
Yeah. Do you believe that your interview process might have been helpful for them to figure out what they're grappling with and how to handle it?
I think in some cases, certainly, like, not to say that like, this was the case for everyone, but in a few cases, I mean, people were crying on the phone with me. It did feel a little bit potentially therapeutic. I don't know if they'd call it that, but I try to give people a safe space to kind of work out what they're feeling and what they're going through. And I think that is how some people approach the phone calls with me. Yeah.
Yeah. So with let's go back to Simone, because obviously people are like kind of, all excited about her, and she was already won 4 gold medals. And, when you hear the twisties, you kind of get a sense of what that must be about. And then you're seeing her doing these amazing maneuvers and all that. And who doesn't love Simone Biles, I guess, except maybe her competitors or whatever. But, what do you think has helped her the most?
In terms of like regaining her competition form?
Yeah.
Honestly, for her, and this is, just speculation, but it sounds like her being open about it and has really helped her a lot, because she has been able to process that it's not something to hide, it's not something to be ashamed of, and just kind of spreading the word and hearing acceptance from the vast majority of people, I would say. I think that has been healing for her. I also think like the court case about like Larry Nassar's sexual assault. Of course, she was a survivor of his assault. I think working through that as well has probably contributed to her mental well-being.
Did you speak with any more of Nassar's victims?
Yes, I spoke with Michaela Maroney, a gymnast, a former gymnast, on the national team, just like Simone. And, that was one of those calls that I feel like tended more toward the therapeutic end of the spectrum, where we stayed on for like at least an hour, probably longer. And we're just talking about everything and the impact that all this stuff had on her. And it's just striking. Yeah.
Yeah. So you're writing this is your first book that you wrote, and you're working at Sports Illustrated, and you're seeing that this is a bigger issue than you probably even realize, mental health with athletes and all that, and you decide to put it into a book. How did you know people that were suffering, athletes that were suffering? Did you have to research it? Was it just pretty obvious, or, common knowledge? I mean, I
I
followed
would
Kevin Love and I had no idea.
Oh wow, yeah. I think with Kevin, there was stuff out there, like he had written an essay for the Players Tribune about his having a panic attack on the court. But so he was maybe on the slightly more public end of things, but some athletes, they'll just drop a comment in an interview here or there. So some of them were really known for, championing mental health causes, and some of them were more just like, yeah, I struggle from time to time, or, said something more um subdued, I guess.
Yeah.
So it did take a lot of research. Yeah.
So as a first-time author, I know you're undertaking your second book right now about Renee Richards.
Hmm.
Well, maybe when you publish that or ready to publish that, you'll come back on. We'll talk about that
I
particular
would
issue.
love to.
But what was the objective? So you're seeing that there's a story out there. A lot of athletes suffering from a lot of people suffer from mental health. They don't even realize that they got mental health issues. They're not getting treated, or maybe they do realize they have mental health issues. They self-medicate and all that. But tell me about how, as a first-time author, tell me about the process of putting it together. Did you have an objective with this story? You just want to write a book? You want to tell the story? Because I know there's probably a lot of people out there. One of my good friends wrote a book. He's writing a second book, and other people are interested in it. So what could you share with a potential first-time author?
Yeah, I think one of the most important things for me was making sure there was enough story there for a book, and not just wanting to write a book, but really making sure I had the right idea, and also making sure, to your question, that I had an objective with it. And I think for me, the objective was like, okay, I want people to understand that this conversation around mental health in sports is gaining steam, that it's not necessarily a new conversation, but that it is an expanding one. And so I wanted people to come away with an understanding of that. And I wanted them to come away possibly being more prepared to think critically about how we ought to go about making things better for the athletes in our lives when it comes to mental health.
Do you believe that what you wrote is something that translates to the non-athlete? Maybe, just a regular, ordinary person that's suffering mental health. Maybe they could glean something from the book and help themselves deal with the issues.
Yeah, I would think so, because there's a lot of stuff in the book about what different athletes do to cope, or what strategies they have, and or even just affirmations that, like, coming forward has helped them, and telling their friends, telling their family, telling their partner, like long before they ever told the media or someone like me. So I think if you're a non-athlete and you're reading stories like those, it could give you encouragement to kind of help yourself out a little bit. Yeah.
So about more or less, how many athletes did you interview?
Oh, several dozen. I would say maybe like probably like 40 or 50.
Wow. Was there anything that was just like shocking to hear? I mean, I can
Honestly,
imagine what the people
yeah.
with Nasser went through was pretty disturbing.
Yes, absolutely. That stuff was, it was tough to hear. I don't know if there was anything that outright surprised me, just because I think what surprised me more than anything is what we were talking about earlier, where people were just excited to talk. They wanted to talk.
Yeah.
I think that aspect surprised me more than any one person's story.
Yeah, that's I can see that for a lot of people, maybe it is a little bit of relief to know that they're not in this alone, that other
Right.
athletes are also suffering. Did you sense that some of these people that you interviewed were essentially, suffering almost exclusively because of the sport that they were in? That the stress, like if they had not done that, they would have been okay. but the pressure of the sport or the people following them around or having to make comments or whatever it was just really caused the problem.
Yeah. So this made it into the book, but it was originally an interview for a Sports Illustrated article with this guy, Tyrell Terry. He was an NBA draft pick a few years ago, was, a pretty promising pick. And I think for him, he was dealing with anxiety that, to listen to him tell it was almost entirely focused on basketball and elite basketball in particular. And so the more elite he got, rising through the ranks, playing in college and then, getting drafted into the NBA, like he would start puking before practices. He was just so anxious. And for him, he ultimately walked away from the NBA, and that made sense to him. Like that relieved a lot of his issues. That's not to say that he maybe wouldn't have ever experienced anxiety without basketball, but I do think for him, the way he tells it, basketball was the root of the issue.
Yeah. Do you believe that most of the people that you talk to are actually dealing with the issues that they were talking to you about? Or was it something like, okay, I realize I got some issues, but I'm not going to deal with it? Or is everybody these days all on board with mental health treatment? At least from what you saw.
I think it's really hard. Like, I think there's some athletes who are speaking out before they're necessarily like ready to get the treatment, but I don't really begrudge them that, I guess. Like, I think mostly people are increasingly on board with getting treatment and getting the help they need. But it's like a multi-step process, right? Like you can't, some people prefer to get the treatment first and then, talk to reporters about it. But some people just, really need to say like, hey, I'm struggling. I don't know what to do about it. So it can kind of go either way.
All right. I know you're not a mental health professional, but somebody listening to this listen, I used to play tournament tennis when I was 13 years old, and I look back on it, I was nervous it was so stressful. It was so stressful. And, I didn't really, I had to process it all by myself as a little kid. And I don't know that I did it in a healthy way, but I know there are parents of children that are, they're promoting sports and all that. Some of them might be pushing too much, but what do you tell like a parent maybe, or even a young adult or a teenager that's performing sports that, just can't really get a handle on it, or maybe there is some separate depression that's interfering with their sports, or maybe causing, the sports are causing their stress. What would you recommend from what you've seen that seems to be working?
Yeah, from what I've seen and what I've heard from experts I've talked to, the most important thing for kids and young adults in particular is to not put all your eggs in one basket. You might be really good at one sport or even multiple sports, but you should still try to develop a sense of who you are outside of competition. Like develop other hobbies, other interests, relationships with friends and other people who have nothing to do with the sport.
Yeah.
Who don't have any investment in how you perform, who will be there for you no matter what. And it's just a matter of like building up your identity so it's more well-rounded. And so that if you do decide, oh, hey, soccer or whatever sport it may be is really stressing me out, you can take a step back and it's not like starting your life from scratch.
Okay, last question here. What did you take away from the experience of writing a book?
Oh boy, writing a book is really, really hard. And don't get me wrong, I knew it would be hard, but it's so much harder than I even thought. And it's exhausting and it's very solitary. And I think what I learned from the experience is to always ask for more help and more feedback than you think you need.
All right, that sounds good. All right, Julie Kliegman, Mind Game, an inside look at the mental health playbook of elite athletes. Great read, even if you're not an athlete, maybe you're struggling with issues and you just want to see what everybody else is going through, might be able to help yourself, move forward. So Julie, thank you for coming on, and we'll circle back. And when do you think you're going to be done with Renee?
I think the book will be out in summer of 26.
All right. Well, if that's the case, then you're coming back to the summer of 26. But thank you for coming on to Cut to the Chase. And that'll do it for this episode. Everybody subscribe, rate, review, and share. This is a very important topic, and that's why I brought Julie on. So Julie, have a good day, and that'll do it for this episode.
Thank you so much.
That's all for this episode of Cut to the Chase. But before you go, will you open up your podcast app and give us a 5-star review? You can also leave a comment about what you liked most or other topics you'd like us to cover. And please be sure to subscribe so you don't miss any upcoming shows. Thanks, everybody. Be safe out there.